Hello, everyone. Today is the 31st of May, 2023. And here with us is myself, Dr. Sri Banerjee, committee member, Dr. Julia Leischner, and then student Sean Donnelly. Sean will be presenting his proposal, oral defense. And Sean, whenever you're ready, you can get started.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, Dr. Banerjee and Dr. Leischner. Today, my defense will be covering examining the effects of loneliness and suicidal ideation in U.S. veterans. Everyone can see this, the slides well, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. Just a brief background. It's again in regards to veteran suicide. There is a existing disparity between veterans and the general population in suicide, and also in addition to that, is suicidal ideation as well. Risk factors are still very unclear. There's a lot of theories out there and a lot of associations between the two, but there's not, they still don't know exactly what are the main variables that can cause this issue. Loneliness is one of the main variables that I want to look at, one of the predictor variables, since there is not a lot of data on it, and it's becoming increasingly more popular. We see studies going into it more because we see how critical it plays a part and plays a role in affecting people's lives. And so I wanted to take loneliness and see how that was applied essentially to veteran suicide and how they work off of each other. Because like I said, previous data, there has not been much data on much research in the literature review on this area, not only in the general population, but specifically for veterans as well. And there's as I wrote here, there's some theories and studies in the general population that claim loneliness is linked to suicide, but again, there's no real significant studies that focus on how loneliness affects suicidal ideation and suicide in general. All right, my problem statement. Loneliness data is not generally studied by the VHA, Veterans Healthcare Administration, or in the private sector. This is something I was kind of shocked to see. Like I said, there were some little bit of associations here and there with it, but not on a significant level was it really studied, and specifically in that area. And so that's generally, a significant gap in the previous literature out there, and that's another reason why I focused in on this, because I thought it was a significant item, but the gap was there as well, and it needed to be filled. The study will explore loneliness and how it relates to veterans and suicidal ideation, with my multiple questions, which we'll get into very shortly. Furthermore, it will also go into a little bit, the research. It will also go into a little bit about the types of veterans impacted, and I think it's interesting. It's a whole nother, I guess, avenue you can go down, but there's when you look at the suicidal ideation, the suicide, it greatly affects actually female veterans. Lately, in the last few years, they have been scaling higher. It's been increasing more for them than male veterans, and generally you have the older veteran population, which surprises a lot of people. Usually, it's around 50 years of age plus that are the ones actually, when it comes to absolute numbers in the veterans community, are having suicidal ideation thoughts and committing suicide. But I thought it was interesting too that female veterans, they actually are outpacing suicide as well, twice as much when it comes to their civilian general counterparts, even more than male veterans versus male civilian counterparts. Purpose of the study. This is going to be a cross-sectional quantitative secondary data analysis. So we're going to begin secondary data from NHANES. That's going to be the data source I'm going to be using. Cross-sectional is just the data that was taken at that point in time of the study. The intent will be to analyze the association between variables after answering the 3 research questions. And we'll get to those very shortly. Let's see here. The findings will be used to drive positive social impact. And the variables I have up here is, veterans will be our independent variable. Dependent variable will be suicidal ideation, and the moderating variable will be loneliness. Covariates I added were age, depression, poverty level, and gender. And I'll go over real quick with you the I think we got it coming up, but the but the purpose essentially about exploring how these questions are, essentially what the questions are, and they will be is it we'll explore whether there is a significant association between veteran suicidal ideation and veteran loneliness. And we'll also look into, does loneliness modify the relationship between veteran status and suicidal ideation after controlling for these variables? And the last question will be exploring whether there is a significant association between suicidal ideation and veteran status after, again, controlling for those variables. Again, we just went over them here. Let's see, we got them. Okay. Research question 1, as I just stated. And you have the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. Research question 2, as I stated, after controlling again for the gender, poverty level, age, depression amongst U.S. veterans. And again, we have the null and the alternative hypothesis. There is no significant association between suicide ideation and loneliness for the null, and the alternative will be there is a significant association between the suicidal ideation and loneliness. Research question 3, as I stated earlier, and again, the null will be loneliness does not moderate the relationship between veterans and suicidal ideation, and the alternative will be loneliness does moderate the relationship between veterans and suicidal ideation. Okay, moving on to the conceptual framework or theory framework. I chose to use the socio-ecological model. I chose this because, from my previous research, the CDC and the VA both suggested there were, social determinants of health essentially were very much a part of how veterans and individuals are developed and are formed or shaped. And so I thought this would be the best concept because we want to look at all the avenues that affect a veteran, just like any individual. Here, we have the framework was developed by Yuri Bronfenbrenner, if I said that correctly, and examines again multiple factors influencing mental health. And loneliness has been linked to social determinants. So I thought again this would make it a perfect reason to use this type of model. And we have, as you can see, individual, interpersonal or relationship, organizational, institutional, community, and public policy. Some of these, this was a little bit smaller of a graphic I use, but it's normally a 5 levels. Public policy is usually the top one. So I kind of condensed it here to make it a little bit easier. But those are generally what you look at and really kind of formulate the questions around and formulate kind of how you're going to create policy when it comes to helping out veterans and any type of individual that would need help in a situation where all those apply. Method and design. Method and design. So again, cross-sectional quantitative secondary data analysis. This method is going to allow me to analyze essential variables that are provided by enhanced data sets to answer my research questions. So my as I said, everything I needed in the sample I had from NHANES. Basically, I'm just merging all the data together into one, and I'm going to be pulling the data from there when I do my analysis work. That's how I'm going to, at the most basic, I guess, understanding of how I'm going to look at that data, analyze it, and process it. This, again, will be a quantitative design, which will allow me to see the causality between variables, which is critical, and that's what you're looking for in a study like this. And going back in a way to looking at the socio-ecological model and how it applies. If I go into a little bit more on it, you have the individual level, which includes certain belief systems, educational level, and things of that nature. And interpersonal level is more about relationships with people. And the other organizational is more about institutions. And the community is obviously, as it says, it deals with the community levels. And 5 is usually the public policy levels, implementing policy and regulations, and things like that to help and assist the veterans and getting through things or any types of issues or problems that they have, any type of policy essentially. Participants and sample size. So again, this will be secondary data, which I'll be using from NHANES. The participants from the source I will be taking they were from non-institutionalized population. Essentially, that means kind of people not from jail, the military, people not from certain homes, just general population. And we have roughly about 10,000, a little over 10,000 here, 10,149 for the sample size. And this was from a randomized sample participation size. So the number is, a lot more than we need, which is good for the amount of participants for the sample. So we definitely got a lot of people. And the great thing is about this sample size is that it's very diverse. Again, going back to looking at especially issues that affect females and senior citizen veterans. There's not a lot of data on that either. And this covers both those areas as well. So I thought that was another good part about it. Again, the previously mentioned covariates and variables were included in that data set. Power level is going to be 80% with alpha 0.05. This is essentially the traditional method and what I have chosen. Okay, data collection technique. Again, secondary data I'm collecting from NHANES. My data set from NHANES was from 2009. It may seem a little older at first, but it kind of just, I guess, reinforces how we lack the data and all this data together and how critical it is. So even though the sample is from then, we still can make a good understanding. We can still develop a good understanding of where we stand with, with these research questions and the results and how we need to kind of look at how we apply policies and look at the issue. So it's still very good data that's needed. And I'll be using SPSS, of course, for this analysis as well. Again, sourcing, collecting, and processing. Okay, so the data analysis plan. So for my research questions, I'll be using logistic regression. Chose this because I thought would be the best analysis, best method. It's a yes and no outcome essentially. SPSS analysis through merge data. Like I said, I'll be merging a lot of the data into one form data analysis sheet where I can then analyze that data through any type of specific methods I need to get the results that that are going to answer the questions. Data cleaning and screening. So for the data and cleaning and screening, I was looking into this and I thought the best methods were going to, as I stated here, I'm somewhat familiar with, but getting a little bit better at trying to understand. It's the bivariate correlation, multi-culinary test under Spearman correlation coefficient. That seemed to be a really, I guess, a really strong, solid way of data cleaning and screening. And I believe it's 0.8 coefficient I'll be using for that. The multivariate outlier check and linear assumption will be met by testing the dependent variable and continuous independent variable. The outcome will be statistically significant if the results are less than 0.05. And social change implications. So ultimately, I'm doing this research because I want to, make a better an impact, a positive impact as social change implementations in the future. And it's going to add to research on veteran suicidal ideation as well. Like I said, it really lacks the research lacks in this area. And I think this will definitely 100% contribute to that. And just one more thing we can look at, and how to make how to try to prevent or create upstream methods to stop suicide from ultimately happening for veterans. And I think we will here, as I said too, it will contribute to better mental health policies and interventions in general. So for me, it's something that's very important, and I think, like I said, we're lacking on that information. And not only can some information like this make implications for veterans, but also for non-veterans as well. So I think, I'm kind of surprised that there wasn't more information on loneliness out there. So for me, I feel like it's something that's generally needs to be looked into, and really should be looked into more so and studied. And even the literature review, like I said, I found some things related and associated with it, but there's no direct impact on loneliness itself and how it relates to suicidal ideation. And even in the literature review, many of the previous authors state the same thing, which I found interesting. And how it's lacking, or how there needs to be a lot more information out there, or a lot more research into these things as well. So ultimately, that's what I'm looking at doing. I'm looking at making a positive social change for veterans and the community. But generally, if this research can help out anybody, that's something that's going to be a big thing for me too. I kind of understand too from that side, because I was a veteran. I have a lot of veteran friends, so I've seen how a lot of things can impact them, and how transitioning can be difficult. And I know a lot of them, I've heard, suffered from just, they felt like they were kind of lost, or didn't have someone to talk to, or didn't have a close relationships with people. So, it's something that I think is very critical and important. But I definitely am looking forward to the next phase of this project, and finding out what those results will be, and definitely sharing it as much as I can. So for me, that kind of wraps it up. Concluding thoughts. Veteran suicidal ideation is strongly associated with social determinants of health, as I stated earlier, and loneliness still has somewhat been neglected in that research. So this is something that I think is going to really contribute to that area, especially for veterans, since we're still trying to figure it out. And in many cases, like I said, veterans suicide, in certain areas there was a small dip in the last couple of years, but generally it's gone back up a little bit, and generally it's still been higher than prior to the war on terror. And so there's still a significant issue. We still don't understand why that is, and there's theories, there's all types of factors that affect it, but no one's just really looked into loneliness yet. So I think it's very important that someone looks into this, and looks at it and tries to get a better understanding of why that is. And lastly, as I wrote here, research shows how loneliness impacts the general population at a critical level. Yeah, if that's the case, then it's got to have some type of connection to veterans as well, and it's important to look into that field as well, because I guess more specifically, it always positively impacts veterans, but we could say positively impacts people as well. Veterans also want to understand that, I guess, in a way, that they also, their problems are acknowledged, and you need people that want to go serve, and they want to know they're going to be taken care of if they have things that happen to them, and that they don't feel connected. So it kind of goes into that bigger picture as well. So I think there's a lot of good that can come from this. And lastly, I'd like to thank both Dr. Banerjee and Dr. Leishner. I know coordinating this was kind of difficult, and I know we still got some more work to do in the future, but thanks for the guidance so far, and what kind of helped get me to this area where I'm at right now.
Sean, thank you for that wonderful presentation. At this point, Dr. Leishner, did you want to ask some questions?
Sure. Great job, Sean. Thank you for explaining your proposal. How does your study define loneliness? I would assume there would be many different ways individually that we each would consider, wow, I'm really lonely.
Sure.
Is there one overarching like definition that you're kind of going on, or is it a multitude of factors that
So yeah, good question. So specifically, that from the data set in Haynes when they took that survey, loneliness was defined as someone identified as needing more emotional support.
short and sweet, very good.
Yeah.
So with that, kind of springboarding off of the data that you presented with stating that women 55 and older are experiencing higher rates of suicide, especially among the veteran population. It's very interesting that you state that, because interestingly, that is the point in a woman's life where menopause is typically encountered, and there is an enormous fluctuation of hormone levels and all kinds of mental and physical symptoms that go along with that. And it just made me curious as to whether that, not that you have to examine this, it just made me very curious to examine, what role that might play in that age group. And perhaps it's, there are many studies out there which indicate, women of that age experience a multitude of mental and physical health issues and depression, anxiety, along with that, and perhaps loneliness. Children are leaving the home and this and that. But so anyway, that's what I found that very interesting. And women are very social creatures, more so than men typically. We tend to form social circles and bonds and like to talk and share our problems. So that kind of actually might even be a protective factor, I would think, that, among us.
Yeah, it's interesting.
What are your thoughts on any of that?
I find that interesting. I didn't think about the whole menopause thing and the age thing, but yeah, I did. I find that really interesting that you mentioned that, and probably something to deep dive into more. Um, but yeah, I find it fascinating. And I briefly looked at some of the stuff why women were kind of, I guess, why their suicidal ideation was increasing faster, and their suicide was than the men. And I briefly looked into it, I tapped on it a little bit, but not too much. And I remember it saying that I think some of them generally they had higher depression levels versus the male veterans when they got out. And I didn't go deeper into why that was, but I remember that was one of the things. But I think there was other variables involved too. Some of it, of course, I remember reviewing. There's a fraction too that had maybe MST, military sexual trauma relatable things that occurred.
And as more research is coming out more and more, we're finding that the root cause of so many mental and physical ailments are due to sexual trauma, childhood trauma, of which all of us have experienced either ourselves or transgenerational epigenetic trauma we've inherited in our genome. So it's such an exciting field
Yeah, it's like endless. It's
Yeah. And just one more thing, because, um, there are a lot of, I would assume, VA support groups. Why aren't these working? Why aren't we catching veterans before they get to this point? Did you find in the literature any inkling as to, I know funding is a major source of the issue, social living in a rural area, not having the resources available and such. But I wondered if you came across any information as to why policies that we have now aren't working well enough to help this population.
Yeah, it's difficult to pinpoint something. A lot of the research I've looked into is that, a lot of it I've seen that veterans can have a hard time transitioning, and then there's that's like their critical component, or I should moment when they transition. And then the other critical moment is later on in life, when I said, like, when I just said when they were older and they were having actually a lot of issues when they're older. So it's, from the research I was looking at, one of the things is veterans, and I think a lot of people kind of understand this point, is they have that pride, and they also don't feel comfortable in talking about a lot of their problems and issues. And so trying to get someone to relate to them or speaking with them is a really important step, and make them feel comfortable they can open up. Because if you don't talk about things, it's very difficult to solve those problems. So I think that's one issue about it, and that really affects veterans. And personally, I've heard from a lot of veterans too. That's the same thing. They kind of just suppress it. They think it's going to go away, or they think that it won't affect them, and they're afraid to kind of just bring it out. They just want to kind of tough it out, essentially. And that's a big part of it. And there was I remember I recall there was some issues related to veterans kind of being with the VA. It was kind of overwhelmed and understaffed. And so for a lot of appointments, this is where policy or money, I guess, can really help out too. Is that a lot of veterans would have to wait. Despite what people hear about the VA, there's actually a lot of good that's come. They've done a lot of good things. But the one thing that is true from the research I've done is they do have a lot of wait time. That's the one bad thing I've always seen. And so veterans, they try to make appointments, they're trying to see somebody, and they can have wait times that can last for like months. I'm not even exaggerating. So I think that's an issue. So kind of what do you do in that in between time to try and help a veteran? You're going to need more funding, more policy that can maybe have a telemedicine type thing, or maybe just somebody that can come out, reach out to you. But I think those two things are the biggest things I've seen. It's kind of like not wanting to talk about it, the prideful thing, and suppressing it, thinking you can tough it out, and the wait times with the VA hospitals. Those are the two big issues I've seen just on the surface level when I looked into it. But I would say those are two areas that really should be looked into more.
I would have to probably agree with you there. Even in the outside of the Veterans Administration, there are physician shortages and mental health services shortages, and just we have a healthcare crisis. Really, I think they're all just, more recently, pretty burned out.
Yeah.
The pandemic, as we all are, in one form or another. But yes, the Veterans Administration, I have a little bit of a connection through my grandmother who passed about a year or two ago. She was a veteran she was in the Women's Army Corps in World War II, and she was so proud of
Very
that.
cool.
And she talked about her relationship with the Veterans Administration and the hospital, which was probably about an hour from where she lived, and having to travel, to get the benefits. And so, that's a barrier too. If you're 90 years old, you got a bus or someone drives that she would volunteer to drive veterans back and forth when she was able. And funny story real quick, and then I'll let Dr. Banerjee take over. I have to laugh, and maybe this is too much information, but she was so upset when she found out that the VA would cover Viagra for men at no additional charge, yet they wouldn't cover her urinary incontinence pads.
Oh my God.
She was just mad.
Yeah.
She
hopefully they changed that.
Gotten in the mail, and I just, there's things like that everywhere with every, type of health coverage where it's just like, really?
Yeah.
Anyway, on that note,
that's a good way to end
it. Kind of lighten the mood a bit.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sean. Great job.
Thank you.
Dr. Leischner, thank you for those comments and questions. Some of them I wanted to revisit. I think I was taking notes, and I think the menopause comment is very much pertinent and relevant here. I think something in the limitations that might go well there. There is menopause data in NHANES. So that can then go there. So yeah, and then I think it's a good point about defining loneliness, what that is, and in the context of NHANES. So thank you for that. And then I think controlling for individuals over age 55, one of the things that we're doing is controlling for some of the confounding variables. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out as well. So Sean, I have some questions for you as well.
Sure.
Um, so one of the things, could you go back to the slide, purpose of the study?
There we go. Oh,
Yeah. Um, so something in here. Oh, I was going to ask, what does covariates do? What is the purpose of covariates?
your covariates can they make an impact. They're associated with the testing with the independent variables here in the monitoring variables. So like age, they're significant. I guess I don't know layman terms to explain them, like significant identifiers that can play a role. If
Uh-huh.
that makes sense.
Yeah, and the that's one way to put it. I think the other way is that covariates are what you're controlling for as like confounding variables.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, so if you have two groups, then the statement can be made that it's because of differences in age.
yeah.
Um, by controlling for that, then you know that it's not from age. The differences then are from the independent variable that you're using, veterans. And yeah, so
Yeah, it's a much cleaner way of putting it.
yeah, yeah. Can you go into research question 1?
Sure. Right here. There you go.
Yeah. And so you do have it controlling for, whereas in the previous slide you're saying as a covariate. It seems like it's not that big of a difference,
Hmm.
but it does it is different. Controlling for versus covariate.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Um, okay, all right.
Yeah. Do you want me to? Do you want me to just do change it out then? I mean, is
um,
that okay?
well, if we can go through the document and make sure the covariates is changed to confounding, um, then.
Okay.
Mhm. And then, yeah, you did go into social ecological model and social determinants of health. One of the slides, you said that causation is what you're looking for. Could we go to that slide?
Uh, yeah. Let me see which one that was.
Yeah, uh,
Okay.
to see the causality. In a cross-sectional study, you can't assume causality.
Okay.
Yeah, correlation, not causation.
Correlation. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Um, Oh, so you narrowed your study down to veterans. Do you think you'll have enough subjects for your study?
Oh yeah, I think definitely we'll have enough. I know on the data I pulled, I know uh, there was many participants that we had in the study. It was more than enough. So I'm fairly confident that we'll have a good amount of individuals for this study. A lot more than I've seen in previous studies. So I think we're good on that. No,
Thank you. Yeah.
and Haynes took a lot. Yeah, they took a lot in the sample. And I remember there's a lot of veterans in that sample too.
Yeah. Um, oh, um, so we're talking about suicidal ideation. Do you have any idea how many of these individuals that have ideation actually complete suicide?
I don't think offhand I do. Um,
Is that anything
I
that
do.
you found in your research, or?
So I'm trying to look now. I don't think I have that.
Mhm.
I don't think I have how many actually completed. No, I do. I did find, it's interesting. I did find that a lot, the majority of individuals um, that were that got triggered, I guess essentially, however they define it, triggered into committing suicide,
Mhm.
were a lot of people, I should say, that were others, like if they were under alcohol influence. That was really a
Mhm.
big triggering event that caused a lot of people to act on suicide.
Mhm. How about suicide attempters?
Attempters. Okay,
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
how many? Let me see. How many we have attempts? Are you, Professor? You talking about in regards to just a percentage of people, or
Um,
veterans in a at a certain age, or
well, percentage, for instance, you have information about the percentage that are ideators.
Mhm.
Um, so do you have a percentage of suicide attempters or completers? Um,
I don't think I have on how many actually complete it. No, not now. I don't.
all right. Okay. Well, that might be something that in chapter 5 we can actually section 4
Okay.
we can look into. So um,
Yeah,
the
that's a good thing
DRPH.
to look
Mhm.
into.
Mhm.
Let me see, complete suicide. Um, so essentially, yeah, I guess you could also, are you incorporating completed suicide or attempted suicide? Completely. So essentially, committed suicide as in they're not the act of it, but they actually completed it, like they
Mhm.
died, right? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because I learned an interesting new term doing this research, and it was the attempt of suicide without completing suicide, and it was
Hmm.
parasuicide.
Yeah.
So, okay.
All right. Oh, you talked about multicollinearity.
Mhm.
What is that?
So that was, that's something I looked into, and it looked like one of the best ways it's a data cleaning and screening. So I, I'm not too knowledgeable on it yet, but I know it's what a good way of doing it. You can do it through SPSS, um,
Mhm.
and it will essentially. I think what I want to say is it points out like the outliers. So if you get like a less than 0.001% of outliers, I believe, uh, then that's what you're looking for.
Mhm.
So that's what you want. So in regards to that, I think that's essentially what I'll be doing.
Yeah. I think what you're describing is more homoscedasticity.
Okay.
Um, I think that's one of the assumptions, but the main one is with multicollinearity is you're looking for the fact that are there relationships between the independent variables, uh, and if
Yeah,
there is
improper relationships, right? I think that's what it was,
yeah,
right? Or something along those
significant
lines.
relationships, yeah,
Okay.
um, and if there is multicollinearity, then you need to take that into consideration.
Mhm.
So yeah, um, does that make sense or?
Oh yeah, yeah. I do remember a little bit now that you mentioned that. I remember it was related to, yeah, and proper relationships that were priorly, I guess, essentially established that could throw it off. And so
Yeah,
you got to
between
look
the
at it in the SPS when you put it into the testing, and ensure to a certain level of threshold that it's not, and then you're good to go.
yeah, between predictor variables, between the various predictor variables. And then, oh, in one of the slides you said simple relationships, simple random sampling.
Which one was it, Professor?
In the method design, randomized.
Was it this one right here? This slide?
Yeah, but somewhere you said simple.
Maybe I misspoke.
Oh, yeah, it's actually not simple. It's complex samples.
Yeah, I could have just misspoke on it, I think.
Oh, yeah. So this is just what I don't think it's there. So
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything.
yeah. All right. So that's all the comments and questions I had. Dr. Leischner, how would you want to discuss this? Did you want him to go and then we discuss, or?
I'm open to vote in his presence if you are.
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Dr. Leischner.
I would approve. Did he pass?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I second that.
Okay.
As Dr. Leischner said, very thorough work, and congratulations.
Congratulations, Sean.
Thank
Breathe
you
easy.
both. Thank you
Breathe
both.
easy
Thank you
now
both.
for a little while.
For a little
Yeah.
bit. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I know. I feel a little bit like a little like relaxed, a little bit more.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yesterday probably got you more keyed up, a little more keyed up, just with the little hiccup. So I apologize for that added stress.
Oh, yeah.
It's okay. Not at all. I get it. It's understandable.
Yeah. Congratulations on
Yeah.
to IRB approval.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Make sure to celebrate.
Yes,
Yeah.
I will.
Yeah.
I definitely will. And I'll get right on to the next steps, which I got to do.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thank you both for your time again. And I know you guys are
Any
very,
questions for
very
us?
busy.
Or?
I know you're busy. You pointed out some good things. I took notes, and I think my next step is to start working out. I think I might have to do something else with IRB. I can't remember. I got to double check. But
Yeah, IRB.
yeah, and then I'll look at the notes. And I know the next session is coming up is tough too. So it's I'll really start to get my head in there for the actual process and the results and the statistics sections and all that. So
Yeah. And reach out anytime. I'm busy. I'm not busy for you. So that.
Mhm.
So yeah.
great.
I also
Okay.
just saw that Tammy sent out some great resources for students today.
Oh, okay.
I
I
don't
saw
know.
that too right before.
Yeah.
Right before I got on, I saw it. I was like looking at it, and I was like, I have no time. I have to go back.
Yeah. So for future reference as
Okay.
well. So
Yeah, awesome. Okay. Thank you both very much.
congratulations, Sean.
Yeah. Congrats.
Thank you. I'll be in contact.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Bye.